Hello, I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. In fact, I'm going to be talking about the new moon in Aries on the 12th of April. Now, all new moons aren't equal, and the reason they're not equal is because of the setting that they take place in. What other astrological factors are forming the background to that new moon? And on this occasion, not only is the new moon in Aries the first sign of the zodiac, so we get a real sense of a pioneering spirit attached to that new moon, but it's also taking place amid some very, very powerful influences. Predominantly, we're talking about Pluto. On the day of the new moon, we have Venus squaring Pluto. A few days later, on the 17th, we have the Sun squaring Pluto. And over the weekend, we have Mercury squaring Pluto. So that's a triple kind of aspect to this mighty planet of change and transformation. So that's going to make that part of April, and I think really from about the first few days of April right through to the middle of April, a very powerful period. Now, I always talk about positives and negatives because you never get a Johnny one note with any of the planets or any of the aspects or the signs. There's a kind of tier of meaning. And when we look at Pluto and we think about the personal planets, Venus, Mercury, and the Sun, hooking up to it at a 90-degree angle, it's an angle of tension, then we know we've got conflict, we know we've got contentious things going on, and that it isn't a very easy climate to work with. If things can be difficult, they will be difficult. The good side? Well, yes. What we get rid of, what we do, what's done and dusted, creates new growth. So something new springs up in the place of the things that have gone. And that's a really very powerful kind of theme. And we need to be thinking about that really in the first half of April, not just on the day of the new moon. Now, another thing that I want to talk about in terms of this new moon, I've mentioned the idea of pioneering, and that's because if we have one word that we could use for Aries and that we could all share and relate to, is this idea of Aries the pioneer. Aries goes where angels would fear to tread. And it is a very kind of adventurous sign. And it gives little thought of the consequences of its action, which I'm not saying is a good thing. But sometimes we need to be bold. We need to take risks. No risk, no reward. And that moon in Aries, new moon in Aries on the 12th, reminds us of those factors. If we want life to change and move on, we want things to happen in terms of our ambitions and desires, then we have to be prepared to take a risk. Now, of course, this new moon is particularly important for all Arians because this new moon takes place in your sign in the first house of your solar chart. So it's very personal. It's to do with the things that you want to have a personal stamp onto. It can have to do with your image. So you have a look at who you are, what you look like, your levels of fitness, and all of that, and think, I could do with a new look. That's perhaps the first thing Aries might take into consideration on this new moon. But of course, we can start personal projects, and it's time really to take ourselves in hand and think, what could we do better? What could we do that would make our lives better? And that new moon helps you make new starts. And I'll come back to this shortly when I look a little bit more at Pluto. For Librans, then this new moon is taking place in the seventh house. So that's the area of relationships. So you begin a new cycle for relationships. And that can mean new relationships coming in. It can mean new things happening to established relationships. And of course, it means a kind of getting into a new gear with all our relationships, not just, with our significant other, if we have one, our intimate relationships, but our working relationships, our family relationships, relationships with people who have a part to play in our lives. And this begins a general new cycle. There is something, of course, that I always mention when we're looking at new moon, full moon, and that is that we make new beginnings and new starts at a new moon. And then we see where they've taken us in 6 months' time. So on this occasion, whatever your sign, be conscious about starting a new thing or several new things, new projects, new activities, almost like making new resolutions. And in 6 months' time, when the full moon in Aries takes place on the 20th of October this year, you'll be able to see how far you've got. In some cases, projects will complete in 6 months. In others, you'll be able to see, well, I did well up to this point, let's keep going. And of course, particularly in regard to relationships, if a relationship begins around the time of the new moon, and we'll stretch it a little bit back from there in early April, right through to maybe mid-April, because the new moon will still have a signature on that. We can think about how far we've come in 6 months' time, whether the relationship is complete, it was a short contract, or whether it's something that you'll want to build on and make bigger. And that really goes, well, particularly for, I think, Libra and Aries, and then secondly, for Cancer and Capricorn. And in general, we sort of make a conscious connection with the new things that begin around the new moon. And remember, there will be a completion point or a stage reached by the middle of October. So if we come to Cancer, we can see that that new moon is taking place in the 10th house of your solar chart. And this has a lot to do with your life goals. And life goals can be anything from, having a big family or moving to a different country, or it can be very much related to your career. Our life goals are all personal. They change from person to person, but they can be about career as well. So this new moon has a lot to do with new starts in all these areas. So it may be a new job in the pipeline for some Cancerians, or a new stage of an existing job. And certainly, if you want to get moving on your ambitions and goals, then this new moon is a really great time to start thinking about making moves to manifest those goals of yours. For Capricorn, it's really the opposite. We're in the fourth house. So the new moon is all about the roots of life. This is my base in life, my home where I live. It's my family. It's my ancestors. And it's all those things that make me feel rooted and secure and stable in life. So a new moon here means a new start. So for some Capricorns, maybe it's all about a new home or a new member of the family or something new taking place within the home, redecoration, renovation, could be anything. But I rather like the idea that this is where everything begins, the fourth house of the horoscope. So all new beginnings have the potential to grow into greater things in the future. Now, I said that I would come back to Pluto and talk about this, and really very specifically in reference to the new moon. Because on the day of the new moon, the 12th of April, Venus will be 90 degrees away from Pluto, so it'll be squaring Pluto. So there's this idea of getting rid of stuff in preparation for the new to take root. So in this time before the new moon, it's a very good plan to at least think about, make lists, get things ready, or actually do them, to phase out certain activities. And in that idea of elimination, we all do accumulate a lot of clutter. I think about my understairs cupboard. That could do with a good clear out. And as I say, often when we do that, we send a really big message to the psyche that says, I need to get rid of a lot of clutter I have in my psyche, those pervasive thoughts that keep interfering with our freedom. We're bound to our thoughts and opinions about things. We can't break free of them, and we can't create new pathways for ourselves. So that idea of Pluto in a good way is to actively set about getting rid of clutter. And it's a very powerful way of working with our astrological influences rather than just letting them take hold of our life in a way that we can't really, control them so easily. And I have to say that, especially if you're in that 17th of the month group, and I've mentioned, March and April and July and October, but really any birthday on or near the 17th of the month, you'll have Pluto angling your sun. And so it still applies to you. And again, sometimes it means that things go anyway. It's the end of the road for things, and new things come into their place. But there's another very important influence happening at this time, around the time of the new moon on the 12th, and that's Neptune shaped. On the 9th of April, Mars in Gemini angles Neptune, another 90-degree angle, which is a dynamic angle. It's an angle of tension, but we can be sure there's an effect when we have an angle of tension. And on the same day, the moon will be in Pisces, conjunct Neptune. So we have a kind of double whammy here. And what do we associate with Neptune? Well, we associate dreams, flights of fancy, otherworldliness. We become very inspired under Neptune. But you know, this planet isn't called the master of muddles and disinformation for nothing, because that's also what happens on Neptune's watch. We get a lot of chaos and confusion. So that's something to watch out for around that time. Is the information you're receiving real? Do you act on it or do you check it out? And also, I think sometimes we get those enthusiasms, don't we? We think, oh, wouldn't this be wonderful? And often it is, and we can get behind it and do it. But often it's got nothing to do with reality. We just had a flight of fancy. So that's worth building into your thoughts and activities around that time. But there's something else that's rather interesting about this Neptune factor. And that's because it is a signature on the coronavirus. At least in my researches, that's what's been thrown up. And I've talked about this quite a lot on my Friday Bites on my website. And I talk about it, from time to time on my videos as well. But what's so very interesting, every time there's a big and important Neptune development, like a square aspect, or a conjunction, or a full moon conjoined to Neptune, something happens in the world of the coronavirus. There's a new mutation, some decisions are made, there's a vaccine rollout. All those things tend to occur when Neptune is particularly strong. And if I take you back to the 19th of March, when in fact Neptune completed its shadow cycle, what did we find happening at that time? Well, the AstraZeneca vaccine came under close scrutiny, and various countries, I think maybe 9 or 12 countries, decided to halt its rollout. They wouldn't use it because it had been linked to blood clots, and so there was a hold on it. That was released in many countries, and AstraZeneca came back on the vaccine menu. But also around that same time, you had the beginning of what I'm going to call the vaccine wars, because it was at that point that Europe got very upset with Great Britain about the fact that Great Britain didn't seem to be sharing its vaccine, its AstraZeneca vaccine, which a whole lot of Europe has decided wasn't up to scrunch. Anyway, be that as it may, but the threats and the discussions, shall we call it that way, discussions that Europe was having at this particular point rested on the fact that if Great Britain wasn't prepared to be more liberal with its vaccines to other countries and to Europe specifically, then perhaps Europe might just blockade the vaccine getting through to England. So what I think might be interesting is around this Mars Neptune time, 9th of April. And remember, we're running into all that Pluto influence at that time too. We could really find things getting very, very contentious at that point. We'll wait and see what happens. But in fact, to return to the idea that April is a month of two halves. We have a strongly Pluto dominated first half. By the time we get to the 19th, 15th, 19th, round about there, Uranus takes over. And that's a very, very different vibe, for want of a very, kind of, for want of a different word. I'll be talking about the Uranus vibe in my next video. But it's going to be interesting when we look back on April and think how things did really radically change just after Easter or around about the middle of the month. And you may find that relevant to your own life, what happens in your own life, big changes around that point, or you may find it in terms of global events. So let me come back to the idea of what we do about our astrology. I'm here talking about new moons and about configurations and, you know, things that have an astrological signature. But everything, in my view, has to be about living. I mean, astrology must be a living thing. We must be able to apply it and make it useful to our lives. It can't really be one of those kind of ooh things that are so mysterious that they just happen to us and only certain people have the key to what that might mean. Let's make it real. Let's bring it into our lives and work with it. I'm all for working with the astrology. And what I would say, looking at this period up to the new moon of the 12th of April, a little bit after that as well, is that we really need to, end things in preparation for that new moon. And that can be anything from toxic relationships to habits that we've all got to the things that I have already talked about, the idea of getting rid of clutter. It's good to feel liberated and free. And we can get that feeling even from clearing out a cupboard. But imagine that feeling if you really do make a conscious attempt to get rid of habits and relationships and all those things that we allow to come into our lives, and they prevent us from moving forwards. They prevent us from our own liberation. So, have a great couple of weeks in this new moon period and take care. And I look forward to speaking to you on my next video in a couple of weeks' time. Bye for now.